I don't like forcing workflows onto people because that's not what I'm in business for, right? Like we like to work with the top and the most efficient advisory firms on the market. The average advisory firm that is using Hubly is growing 33% faster than the average RIA firm in general. Like we only work with the top tier firms who are building incredibly efficient and lucrative and profitable businesses that want their teams to be highly efficient and they want to serve as many clients as possible. If that's not what you're looking to do, Hubly is probably not the right solution for you. You can use an Excel doc or pen and paper. And so I think understanding what you're working backwards from and then making the decisions on how you want to build that business accordingly is so crucially important for any business.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. On this episode of the show, Louis Retief, co-founder of Hubly, is with me for a fascinating conversation about his journey as a wealth tech founder right out of college, by the way, and what it has been like to have his company acquired by Docupace and now be part of a larger team with a shared vision of helping financial advisory firms become more efficient and effective with their operations so they can focus on serving clients versus spending time trying to figure out how to make the engine go. So whether you are a financial advisor or a back office professional working at a wealth management firm or working in wealth tech or FinTech more broadly, there is something awesome for you in this episode. You're absolutely going to love it. Now, before we get to the conversation with Louis, please do make sure you take a moment to subscribe to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest for the show, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford everywhere on the internet, or you can shoot us an email, podcast@finservmarketing.com. Okay, let's jump to the conversation with Louis Retief. Yeah. Wow, Louis Retief, so wonderful to see you. Welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast.
Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to have this discussion today.
Yeah, have this discussion start again. So, for those of you who are watching, Louis and I had to restart the podcast. Well, he didn't have to do anything. He just had to sit there and look awesome while I don't know what the heck happened on my end. So thank you very much for your patience. Great to see you. I started to say before we were so rudely interrupted with whatever happened with the browser or whatever, that you and I are off to a fast start. We're both rocking our Yetis here, both rocking similar looks. So, if you're not watching this episode, make sure you get over and watch the episode because you can't buy this kind of handsome on your screen. Just one of those handsome overload is happening for you. So you're welcome, viewers.
You're welcome. Yes.
You're welcome for this. Takes a lot of work to look this good. Anyway, buddy. So listen, in preparation for today's conversation, and I am genuinely super excited for this conversation because I always love when I get to talk to somebody who started something, grew it, and then, gone through acquisition or gone through some sort of major milestone as you have with Hubly. So this is going to be a real treat for me. The nerd that I am in preparing for this, I popped around, watched a couple of your other podcast appearances, read some stuff and so forth. And a few months ago, you were on the Metronomic podcast. Shout out to those guys. And you described Hubly as Trello or Asana on steroids, but purpose-built for highly regulated financial services companies. And I'm like, that's pretty badass sounded. But right? Yeah, I know, right? Sounds good. Exactly. Yeah, I get that tattooed up. But anyway, but one of the reasons why I want to start there and kick off the conversation with that is taking a look at what I call your IMDb of your career at LinkedIn. It looks like you might have launched Hubly kind of right out of college, right? So I guess the first question that jumps to my mind is, how the heck did you know that financial advisory firms needed a project management solution?
I didn't, maybe is the right answer. And so maybe the right question is how did I figure that out? You are correct. Based on my LinkedIn profile, I never had a formal employment job until I decided to start my own company. And so how did I end up building a workflow automation tool for financial advisors or specifically the RIA market. Like that sounds like a massive leap. There's like two hilarious parts of the story that I'll share with you just about my upbringing. And I think what likely led me there is early on when I was around 8 or 9 years old, my dad said, Louis, I don't know what you're going to do one day, but you're going to make something more efficient. And so there's likely something in just how I showed up in terms of just living life where I obsessed over efficiencies. And then in high school, I specifically got pretty obsessed with personal finance. I was like already nerding out about asking my mom, how do I make a budget for my allowance? And I was like, can I talk to your financial advisor and learn about investing? And so I was like always obsessed about efficiencies. And then even in high school, I had this obsession about personal finance. And so through college, I had a number of different opportunities to work on FinTech type of systems and solutions. And that actually led me to my first internship at Wealthsimple. Wealthsimple is Canada's, online investment manager, similar to Betterment in the States. And I did an internship there. And really through that internship, I got introduced to the sub-vertical of your financial technology sector called your wealth management tech sector. And I was like, oh, this is cool. There's like a marriage between financial advice, personal finance, and then like the FinTech systems. This is like a sub-vertical that I am quite passionate or interested about. And I large part discovered Michael Kitz's technology map in 2018. And there just wasn't a lot of technology companies in that sector at that point in time, if you go back to his map in 2018. And I knew I always wanted to build something out of college. And I was like, well, I like this sector. What do I do next? And I decided I found the ADV site and I started just randomly cold calling financial advisors. And I was like, hey, tell me about your business. I'm a college student trying to learn more about the advisory business. I'm also interested in building a software company. Are there any problems you're facing? I ended up interviewing over 100 financial advisors, and several of them actually shared their screen and walked me through how their day-to-day works. And I was like, it was pretty obvious you have a workflow problem. And at that point in time, I was familiar with tools like Trello and Asana. And I was like, the concept of project management already exists. I don't need to reinvent the wheel there, but can you take the same technology and make it available to a more regulated customer who needs more education on how to grow their business? And so that's kind of the long story of like how I think I ended up there, but who knows?
I love that. First of all, I love that story as a dad of 2 kids. I love that story for a variety of reasons. One is I like that you started out when you were a young kid and your parents noticed something about you, right? And gave you a compliment. Like, telling you that, someday you're going to do some efficiency stuff is not like slanderous, right? Like I know every kid thinks like astronaut or, sports star, movie star, musician or whatever. But every once in a while you recognize, I have a daughter who is like you, very early on, you could notice that she's very tactile. She likes doing things with her hands, building things. And she's very meticulous in the way she does stuff. So it's kind of what you're saying, like, efficiency, but like process oriented, like she thinks it through and then she just goes through it. It's like, it's really, you do recognize that about people when they're younger. The other thing I love about that story from a dad perspective, and I think all the other dads in the audience and moms could nod along at this, is I have a son who's in college now, right? And I recommend to him all the time, and I recommend this to young people too, pick up the phone, send the email. People will get on the phone with you, the Zoom, the whatever, simply because you are a college student or a high school student. They'll be like, oh yeah, young guy, love to help out the young guy. This young guy's interested in financial advisory businesses and wants to nerd out on some things. And you will get probably a 90% positive response rate. Yeah. I don't know what the curve looks like. Like the older you get, how does it come down as you get older? It does because everybody assumes you're trying to sell them something, whereas they don't have that level of suspicion when you're a young guy for some reason. Everybody wants to feel like they helped out the young guy. So for the young entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial minded kids in the audience, listen to Louis. He's got some smart advice there. It's a great way to do this.
Leverage the student card as long as possible. If I'm being 100% honest, I was calling myself a student even after I graduated.
I might tell people I'm a grad student. I might just start calling people going, hey, I'm a grad student. Want to talk to you about doing some stuff.
It opens up so many doors. Leverage the student card, even if it is a white lie. As long as the intentions are healthy and good, I think it's okay.
I absolutely love it. That's fantastic. No, it is true. You're trying to solve a problem, right? And I think what's really interesting, I want to dig in a little bit more to this concept of recognizing that there is a project management solution needed for wealth management professionals, because you said you're calling into them, you're talking to them about their business, and all of a sudden you're like, I recognize you have a workflow problem, right? I suspect most financial advisors aren't particularly familiar with the concept of workflow and operations management and things of that nature. So did you find in the early days of starting Hubly that you kind of had to do a lot of education in that space, like to try to get them to understand, like, this is what this concept of workflow and operation management is?
I wish we figured that out sooner, if I'm being honest. As someone who was pretty tech savvy, even though I was young, the concept of workflow just intuitively made sense to me. And I'm like, everyone should understand the concept of workflows, right? And specifically, the way we designed the workflows is we used what is well known as Kanban, right? The Kanban board, where you can go from, to do, in progress, done, right? And the Kanban design, like, Toyota invented the concept of Kanban, and then all of these project management tools just took the same concept, put it into a piece of technology, and then all of them have been wildly successful. And I think that interface just makes a lot of sense to the human brain already. And so I was just like, this makes sense. Everyone should get it. And I think it took us a little longer than it should have to really double down on education. And now that's pretty much all we do as a go-to-market strategy, is that the Kanban or workflow-like system, it's incredibly powerful. The problem that most people run into is like, what do I do with it? And we've seen some hilarious workflows in Hubly that are completely unrelated to the actual operations of an advisory firm business. We have this one firm that has built this epic workflow that is an office plant watering workflow that automatically routes tasks to different people each week around whose responsibility is to water the plants. And I use it as a ridiculous example because it's the nice thing about workflow and operating systems is you can use the technology and build pretty much anything. But that's also the challenge with it, is that people struggle to decide what workflow to build. And so we've had to really educate on here's all the options, here's the best practices, and build libraries of templates and case studies and video content to do that. And I think it took us longer than it should have to really double down on education. And so that's been our primary go-to-market strategy to date, is the education piece. And I think the reason for that is that advisors aren't particularly good business owners. That's not what they got into this for. They love giving financial advice. They love helping families, and they like that type of impact. And then they're stuck also being a business operator, and they struggle balancing those two roles as an advisor. And I can totally understand why, because they're very, very different.
Yeah. It's really, I'm so glad you said that, because, a few years ago, I had Robert Russo, the CEO of Independent Advisor Alliance, on the show. And, he made the case that most financial advisors are accidental business owners. And I have basically quoted him a dozen times after that, because it's so true. It's really stuck with me that he's absolutely right. Most advisors got their start as either stockbrokers or insurance agents, for the most part, here in the States at least, right? They're selling, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, or some sort of, structured insurance, annuity or life insurance based product or whatever. But, even new advisors today, they come into the industry in a sales or relationship management style role. They're not thinking operations is something I have to think about. They're not thinking marketing. They're not even thinking about finance, like business finance and accounting. They're thinking about going to get clients, right? getting those clients onboarded, working with those clients, right? And getting more clients, right? That's basically the whole deal.
I'm just going to expand that issue of like, there's so many professionals in this world who are accidental business owners. And I don't think it just plagues financial advisors or insurance agents. I grew up in a household of doctors, and doctors are also notoriously terrible business owners, and they're accidental business owners. And the same concept applies for a lot of accountants, lawyers. They are professionals because they love the work of that profession, but they don't love building the business around that profession. And those require fundamentally different skill sets and talents. And so I think it's more broadly, it's a challenge of professionals really caring about their trade or craft, and then having to actually be the business operator as well is really difficult. And then it's a question of like, how do I build a team to do the things that I don't want to do? And so I can focus on the actual client work I want to do. And so I actually grew up in this family, a household of doctors. And so I got to witness this challenge of being the professional and also being plagued with having to build the business. And when I saw that exact same parallel in the advisory piece and the financial advisors, and so it's like the education piece then became, how can we help them be better business operators and business owners?
I love it. I love it. And I love that a little earlier, you mentioned that, it's not as intuitive as you think to tell people like, hey, use this tool to build a process, right? To understand workflow. As you said, some of them are working on stuff like watering their plants and so forth. And you kind of had to go back to the drawing board. But that goes back to like that statement that I quoted you of like, it's a purpose-built solution. So I imagine you've gone in and you said, okay, now that I've talked to hundreds, and at this point in time, it might be thousands of financial advisors and people who are working in back office to support them, you have a good read on, okay, here are the core processes and the core pain points of managing a business. And here's what we need to have in Hubly to support those types of workflows. What are like some of the most typical opportunities for improvement in advisors' businesses when you walk into one fresh?
Yeah, there's so many. I will focus on like the three most common challenges I hear, and then I'll talk about the most common solutions to those challenges, or at least like we help advisors understand that. So the main challenges we hear is that advisors and their teams and operations leaders are coming at us and they're like, we're really worried or afraid things are going to fall through the cracks. Probably a term everyone listening to this podcast has heard and is very familiar with. The second one that we hear is that I am really concerned and want to improve team accountability. It's another common one. And then the third one is that we need to be more efficient. We can't service our existing client base. We can't bring on new clients because we just are not efficient enough. And although those are like at a base, like pretty good pain points or challenges, they're very unspecific, right? Like, what things are you worried about falling through the cracks? What do you want to have be more efficient? Which team members need to be more accountable? What aren't they accountable for? And so I find when I'm on calls with advisors, it's like, okay, let's dig a level deeper. Like, your challenge is team accountability. That's a very broad statement. Are there specific tasks, and I try not to use the workflow analogy or term at this point, are there specific tasks that you need better accountability on? And then, you can normally dig a level deeper. And most commonly, there are like three workflow or process challenges that every firm has and every firm needs to focus on first before you can get fancy and work on the all other things. Is that you need a more streamlined and accountable and standardized client onboarding process. You need a better way to track what I more broadly call all of your money movement workflows: account openings, trades, transfers, Roth conversions, contributions, disbursements. Anything that involves the movement of money needs a workflow, period. And then the third most common is your client review system. Every advisor needs to legally check in with a client at least once a year. Most good advisors are doing it twice a year or sometimes quarterly. And so what is your review system for managing your existing book? If every advisory firm can solve those three challenges, you will operate 100% more efficiently. and you'll be a lot more scalable and you'll generate a whole lot more revenue. And then there's some more nuanced ones like tax prep or tax loss harvesting. Like the tax stuff is interesting, your annuities and your insurance, but not every firm does those. But I would really focus on those top three challenges that every firm has.
It's so great that you say that. Like, number one, they struggle to articulate it in a way that, again, a process management professional would articulate it. But you're right. Like, I think everybody has those problems. I mean, I think about the whole account, the onboarding, client onboarding problem. It's a real deal. Like, do you not have a process for that? Heck, you and I had we were emailing each other back and forth. I sent over a prep doc, right? I have a process that we use in order to record a podcast. We start with a prep call, right? And then from the prep call, we go to, all right, let's send over a document that has a high level outline, right? Then we record the show. Then of course, there's a process for producing the show, getting the show and post-production up and publish and all that type of stuff. It's not just click record, click publish, right? There's a whole bunch of other steps that go into that type of stuff. And that's true for you and your clients if you're an advisor, right? It's like, hey, you don't just like meet a client and go, okay, you ready? Let's rip, right? It's the type of stuff. And
I got a really funny metaphor I always use for advisors, because a lot of times I'm on calls with advisory firms and they're like, what is a workflow or a process? Like they're at that level of understanding. And I'm like, that's a really good question, because a lot of people use those words interchangeably as well. Like, what is a process and a workflow? Or they're the same thing. Yeah. They're not the same thing. We actually educate on the difference between them. And I love using this analogy. Is the goal of any process is to achieve some sort of outcome. Now let's think of a really simple process, like cooking your family dinner. The ultimate goal is to put food on the table that is edible for the family. Now, within a process, you can have multiple workflows. So in the process of cooking your family dinner, you have the grocery shopping workflow. You have the prep workflow. You have the cooking workflow, and then maybe even the plating workflow. And within that greater process, you can then break it down into specific workflows to achieve a larger outcome. And so I love that analogy, because everyone can understand the process of cooking and also can resonate with that. Even the individual step of grocery shopping has its to-do list, right? I got to write down all the different items I need. I need to drive to the store. I need to come back. I need to put the things in the fridge, right? There's enough steps involved in that workflow that it requires its own holding pattern or bucket of tracking. And so it's a really good analogy that I love. And your podcast analogy is just as good, is that everything has a process. And within that process, there can be one or many workflows depending on how complicated the process is.
Yeah. And just to put it put this in the context of accidental business owner dumb, if you want. Business, yeah, whatever. We'll call it accidental business ownerdom. I've just coined a new term. When you have a business, one of the things that makes a business really is that you have systems for generating profit effectively, right? It's not random, right? And when you're just starting out as an advisor and you're building your book of business, you're acquiring clients, it does feel random. Like you might have been dialing for dollars if you grew up in the old days, or sending emails or attending a lot of meet and greet, Chamber of Commerce meetings, whatever it is to get the business in the door. But you're just like throwing everything against the wall to just get people in the door, sign clients and so forth. And then of course you're learning like, okay, how do I get this person signed? How do I get, transfer of assets in and rollovers and yada, 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 all that stuff happening. But at some point in time, you need to put systems in place for managing the onboarding of a client, to managing, interacting with a client, and getting prepared for having a quarterly meeting or whatever you're doing there. Like those things need to be systematized, not just because it makes you more efficient and hopefully just a better advisor, but it also makes it a real business in the event that, something happens to Louis, Mike can step in on Louis's behalf and know how this works. And the client has a consistent, experience, and they're not looking like, well, who the hell, Louis did it this way. What the heck is Mike doing over here? Right. Like, it's really important for a business.
I think it totally depends, right? Like, as a business owner then, right? Like, what are you working backwards from? Like, what's your goal? If your goal is to
Yeah.
ultimately sell it, if your goal is to build a lifestyle practice, like the way you build your processes and workflows differ, right? Like the way you're going to sell
Sure.
your business for the most is going to be if it's the most streamlined and efficient and easy for someone to buy and do the work that you're doing. And so you should build it that way. Some advisors build lifestyle practices where their goal is to work 20 hours a week. And so then you should build hopefully your processes and workflows to support being able to spend half your,
Yeah.
week on the golf course, wherever you go.
Right.
And the other option is you don't need any of this. If you just want to be a business operator that makes up things as you go, that's also
Right.
okay, right? Like, I don't like to workflow shame people. That's not
Right.
like, if that's your choice, like, power to you, right? Like, I can only educate you on other ways to build your business. And if that's not interesting to you, then keep doing what you're doing, right? Like, I don't like forcing workflows onto people because that's not what I'm in business for, right? Like, we like to work with the top and the most efficient advisory firms on the market. The average advisory firm that is using Hubly is growing 33% faster than the average RIA firm in general. Like, we only work with the top tier firms who are building incredibly efficient and lucrative and profitable businesses that want their teams to be highly efficient and they want to serve as many clients as possible. If that's not what you're looking to do, Hubly is probably not the right solution for you. You can use an Excel doc or pen and paper. And so I think understanding what you're working backwards from and then making the decisions on how you want to build that business accordingly is so crucially important for any business.
I think that's such a smart observation or thing to share, right? That, it's okay if you're a solo operator and you want to, just again, sort of wing it, right? Hey, I built these relationships over time. I'm making great money. I love the lifestyle I have here. I don't want this to be an overly structured business. In fact, that stresses me out, just a notion of structuring everything. But where you're talking about is like, look, and I would assume this is probably true. Most of the firms that end up working with Hubly have recognized, hey, listen, in order for us to grow, we need to get more efficient. We need to put some processes in place. And this is going to be important. And that's the reason why they're growing 30%. They were already growing fast, but they were hitting headwind of some sort, right? Some sort of friction was slowing them down. And so like, hey, listen, let's get a little bit better about this. Speaking about that, this kind of like a good transition into something you said during our prep call a few weeks back and it was about your entrepreneurial journey, but I found it incredibly refreshing, frankly, because very few entrepreneurs entering this space bring it up. And it's you observed, rightly so, that this is a relatively small industry, right? So like, even though we've got a lot of advisors here, like a lot is a relative term, right? It's on average about 300,000 financial advisors in the US. And that means, a lot of people are coming and going. There's a lot of like flow in and out, the new advisors who enter the industry, growing their business, some washing out, some retiring, all that type of stuff. I want to dig into this because, while it's a small but mighty industry, managing trillions of dollars of AUM and influencing lots of financial decisions with millions and millions of clients. I think what happens is a lot of firms come in and their first idea is to focus on like kind of the front side of the business, the customer facing side, client facing side of the business. And I think that's because, you were actually rightly pointed this out in the prep call. People see things like the big shiny stuff, the apps on the phone, the wealth management apps and so forth. And they're like, oh, great, let's just bring that to the advisor world. Like everybody in the advisor world is going to want to do this stuff. And we've kind of talked a little bit about this before, but like, I wonder if you could dig in a little bit better about like, what are you seeing that's, transformational in the kind of like the back office side of things? Like, see that, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And I'll just level set like how I see the industry, and then I'll share with you what is the unique insight that we found. And we made a lot of mistake, I think, that a lot of technology vendors make in the space early on. We did a lot of those things as well before there was a unique insight that we discovered. So I think the reason it's a small market, and I would say small market yet shrinking from just a pure number of users perspective, I think it's important to we're partners with a lot of financial advisory firms. Like, you should know how your partner's business works.
Yeah.
90%, 95% of technology vendors charge on a per user basis. That is just the most common mechanism that exists in SaaS today. AI is challenging some of that, is to charge per user. And so when I say small market, right? Like let's say you're selling a solution to financial advisors and you're charging $100 a user, right? You can take 300,000 times $100, and that is the total addressable market of potential revenue that your software company can generate. Now, if a software company generally raises venture capital dollars or bootstraps, there's a question around how big is this opportunity? And so the challenge with the wealth management tech market is that the number of users, even if you add all of the back office users that exist in the market, is about 1.1 million users. Yeah. And so it's not a huge market, especially if you charge on a per user basis. That's why a lot of your custodians do really well, like Altruist as an example, because their total addressable market is actually all the assets because they charge a per asset fee. And so that model works a lot better in this space, and that's why a lot of companies do that. The per user economics is actually difficult. And so I think it's just important that everyone knows that. And so that's why you generally see the technology players in the space, the software isn't as good as if you go use software in a different industry. Yeah. Like, I'll just give you an example. The software tools that Hubly as a software company has access to are significantly more powerful than the tools that financial advisors have access to. And it's purely a VC funding economics issues and potential size of business issue. And so I think that's important just to distinguish. And early on, Hubly, like most of the technology vendors out there, we try to sell to financial advisors. And we did that successfully, primarily through, Louis' cold calling efforts. And then at some point, we really started to look at our early on user data. And we're like, who is actually using Hubly? And who's making the decisions and successfully implementing Hubly? And it became very clear that the financial advisors are hardly ever in Hubly, and there kept being this recurring theme of someone else in the business who generally makes the decision and then is the core user of Hubly and implementer at Hubly. And in most cases, it actually ended up being the operations manager, the COO, the head of administration. And in a lot of cases, it was a female in those roles, if you look at most advisory firms. And we started to really pay attention to this user on Hubly, and we started actually calling them the process and automation influencer in a firm. And that core insight of that user archetype who was the core, even if the advisor came on the call, that advisor never made a purchase decision without the support from their process and automation influencer. And so we just started directing all of our marketing efforts, all of our education, all of our sales efforts towards the process and automation influencer, to the extent where if I'm on a sales call with an advisor and they have a process and automation influencer in their firm, I will not let them make a buying decision until they have the support of their process and automation influencer. Because without that individual's buy-in, the implementation of Hubly will fail, period. And we also started really intentionally building features and functionality specifically for that user, not even for the financial advisor. And so I think that unique insight has been crucial in us basically pivoting all of our marketing efforts, even our product design efforts, even in educating our engineers on how to build features. It's all focused on the process and automation influencer in a firm. And on the bright side, there's way more of them than there are financial advisors who are actually in the back office supporting the work that financial advisors do. And so that's been a big change for Hubly. And, just even in simple things like keyword bidding, we're not competing with the most common keywords that advisors are searching. We're bidding on the keywords that the operations managers are searching for. And so we have a lot more open space in how we target that because everyone else is so focused on the financial advisor. So that's kind of been our strategy and unique insight through this process. Yeah.
It's so funny. I'm so glad you walked through that. And I wasn't expecting, by the way, that journey with that question teed up. So thank you very much for rescuing the question. It was way better than I thought it was going to be. It's so funny. I had a very similar experience. Back in, this is going to date me a little bit, but I was the head of strategy for a company called Socialware, right? And we were basically the first company out there making it possible for financial advisors and the firms that they work with to use social media and be compliant, right? So you archive all your posts, making sure that everything is supervisable and so forth. And one of the things I saw very early on in the day, that process is you go into a firm and sales cycles are really long. But they would say, okay, great. We're going to take 50 licenses, put it in a pilot program. And then who's going to get it? Our top producers. Well, your top producers are like, they're already making millions of dollars a year. Like most of these guys are never going to do this, right? They're just going to sit on it for 6 months. And so they wanted these 50 users because they get to eat first because they're top producers, to sit on this product, never use it. Right. And then at the end of the 6 months, they're going to be like, well, we don't know. Or maybe they'll roll it out to their advisors. Right. So number one, get it in the hands of people who will use it. But to echo what you're saying, even back then, I'd flying all around the country, speaking at advisor conferences, talking to them about how you should use social media and why it's beneficial for your business, yada, yada. This is like 2011 range, just to give context. Inevitably, somebody's hand would go up and go, can my assistant do this for me? Right. And it's so true what you're saying, right? A huge percentage of the actual work that is going on in most financial advisory firms is being done by somebody that's not named financial advisor, right? Just look at the math. And so if you're not selling to that person, you're not talking to that person and educating that person and building your solution to facilitate their workflow, you're making a big mistake. So I love the fact you went through that process.
And I'll be honest, hindsight's 2020. I think Hubly would be a significantly larger organization today if we did that sooner.
Yeah.
We learned that, we figured that out 3 years into our journey, which was, we got there. I was a first-time technology entrepreneur. I made a lot of mistakes. And I think if we really understood that earlier on, and I didn't just cold call financial advisors, but I actually asked to speak to their operations managers or, the other people involved in making decisions for a firm. And we figured that insight out sooner. I think Hubly would have even more market penetration and adoption. We're still doing fine, but that insight came a little later than I wish it came. I'm glad we still got there, and it fundamentally transformed our business since we got that insight. But I wish, we got there sooner, unfortunately. But we're back on track now.
You're back on track. You're kicking butt. I love it. Well, speaking of kicking butt, earlier this year, Hubly agreed to be acquired by Docupace, which, by the way, every entrepreneur's dream. Anybody's starting out, especially a tech company, right? You're thinking like, okay, exit. You can't help it. They always say you shouldn't start a company with your exit in mind, but people do dream about it. Like, hey, somebody's going to come on and acquire our company and things are going to be awesome. Let's hope, right? Now, I chose the phrase
for $100 billion. What are you talking about?
Of course you were, right? The TAM was like $80 billion. But wait, there's only 300,000 financial. How's that possible?
Yeah, exactly.
It's math. Don't worry about it. Don't get lost in the math. So I chose the phrase Hubly agreed to be acquired by Docupace very specifically because during our prep call, you shared something that I think everyone watching or listening should pay attention to. You said that before you agreed to join Docupace, you watched and listened to every podcast and interview you could find with David Knock, the CEO of Docupace, featured there. And I'm like, that's exactly what I would do. I want to go find out who are these people, right? So why was this research such an important part of your decision-making process? Because you were the first entrepreneur that I've ever heard share that. And as somebody who produces podcasts and videos for a living, I like hearing the fact that you found that very influential. But anyways, I yield the floor to you. Why was this so important to you?
Yeah, so I want to take us a little further back before I'm answering your question, because just the word research prompts a couple of different things in my mind. Is
sure.
Before we even got to the point of considering an acquisition, I was more broadly just doing research on the industry in general. So now if we go back to 2018, when I started discovering the wealth tech market, and you basically map out, and I did this activity, I counted the number of tech companies in the wealth management tech space in 2018, and then I compared it to the map in 2024. There was over a 500% increase in newly founded wealth management tech companies in basically 6 years. That's a lot of wealth management tech companies for, once again, a small market. And so that was one thing that was interesting. The second thing that was like really interesting is I started getting a ton of emails, like almost daily, from XYZ private equity firm saying, hey, are you interested in selling your company? And I'm like, why is this happening? Like this massive growth in companies and all of this PE activity. And I was like, consolidation, right? And then at the same time, you started seeing some really big acquisitions happening, right? Like Redtail got acquired by Orion. Wealthbox raised a massive private equity round. And there was this big PE activity happening, a lot of wealth management tech growth, and then also a lot of like little activity happening just in my email inbox. And I was like, oh my God, the wealth management tech space is in the process of consolidating, and it will continue to consolidate, I believe, for at least the next 2 to 3 years. And so I brought that conversation to our board, and I was like, hey, just so you guys know more broadly, you know, Hubly is, what's happening with Hubly is happening with Hubly, but more broadly, I sincerely believe consolidation is happening in the space, and I would not be surprised if we get an acquisition offer in the next 6 months. Lo and behold, 6 months later, on the clock, basically, I get an email from Genstar. Genstar is the private equity firm that bought Docupace, or a large majority stake in Docupace. Genstar also has a big stake in Orion, just for reference, if no one else knows that. And I had a relationship with Genstar already, just because they were curious about the workflow market for financial advisors. And so I spent some time with their team, just educating them on how I see the market, the opportunity. And so they reached out to me saying, hey, would you be interested in meeting David? And I was like, yeah, sure. I've heard of Docupace. I really appreciated Docupace for the main reason is that they had a back office hero celebration event every single year. And so I was like, I love just that about the organization. And so I was like, yeah, I'd love to meet David and learn more about their vision and what they're up to. And David and I had our initial call, and there was just such initially strong alignment on vision for the back office, what we call the back office heroes in the market, the tools that they need, the purpose that they serve. And that alignment was so strong. And we basically started conversations about joining forces. And as part of that research, I primarily cared about three things. Is one, does this make sense for our customers, right? The options that Louis had at the time was, do I continue bootstrapping? Do I raise more venture capital money? Or do I potentially sign up for a strategic acquisition? And what is going to be the most beneficial outcome for our customers? And Docupace had that strategic vision, and they had a team that not only deeply cared about this customer archetype, the process automation influencer who I've shared we really cared about, but they had a vision to continue serving that. Obviously, access to capital, liquidity. And so alignment on customer was very important. The second thing is, like, does this make sense for Hubly shareholders? And it did. And then the third thing is, I think it's important to know that, like, no one just sells a company, right? Like, it's not just like, here, take my baby and I'm going to go, I'm going to leave, right? Like, every sale that I'm aware of has some sort of retention agreement for the key team members for a time period. And so I knew I was going to large part have to commit myself and some of our core team members to working with these people for a time period. And so it had to make culturally sense for me. And, I I didn't want my next, 12 or 24 months of life to be hell. Like I wanted it to be fun and exciting. And, I wanted to be a good change. And so through all of the research, both on like what was happening globally in the space, research on what I believed was the most beneficial move for our customers strategically, and then research on David and the way he was leading their existing leadership team and leading the vision and the culture at Docupace. Those things all really just made a whole lot of sense to me, and really influencing the decision that I strongly recommended to our board, which everyone ended up agreeing to. And it was still a painful process, but the initial starting point was strong.
Yeah, I love it because to your point, you mentioned like, when your business is acquired, right? There's almost always the expectation that you're going to hang out for a while, right? And advisors are familiar with this, right? When an advisor sells his or her, business or book of business to another advisor, you don't just go like, oh, on the day the deal closes, go, all right, thanks very much, I'm out of here. There's usually some sort of retention agreement, right? Making sure that the client relationship's maintained, making sure that the technology transitions well, and all that type of stuff. But I'm very close friends with the founders of Truelytics, right? Which we actually produced a podcast for, and they were acquired by Envestnet. And Jeremy Carnell, who's now a high-level executive at Envestnet, stayed way longer than his retention period, right? I fully expected he was going to leave, and once his 18 months are up, he's like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go do the next thing, right? But you want to be joining a team that you're kind of open to the notion, like maybe not, maybe this might be something that I do for a while, and it's really interesting. I mean, based on what I'm seeing, at least, and I don't want to predict your future, things are at least going well at the beginning here, because I was on your blog, and you mentioned that Hubly is working hand in hand with PreciseFP, which Docupace also recently acquired. And so I'd love to hear how is that relationship going? Because it's really interesting. How are you guys working together with PreciseFP? Maybe a little background on what PreciseFP is for those who don't know, but how's that working?
Yeah, so post-integration definitely has its challenges. Initially there was a lot of back office integration that needed to happen, right? Like before the acquisition, I was the controller for all Hubly's bank accounts. I did all of the accounting for Hubly. There's a lot of administrative CEO stuff that, on the other side, is quite pleasant that I don't have to deal with those things anymore. And then there were some of the more complicated pieces was really around technology integration and migration, right? Like we use Jira for our software development workflows. Okay. And so we had a Jira environment, Docupace had a Jira environment. And so we had to merge those technologies and obviously collaborate with the other side to make that happen. And so there's definitely, some challenges in any type of acquisition, and specifically on the migration challenges, and that is not disruptive to your client experience. But it's also been fun to think through those, and it's not an opportunity I would have necessarily had, is to work on those types of projects unless there was an acquisition. And then the other fun part, now that we're through, and that was kind of has been really the first 6 months, was just migrating, changing some of our role structures, taking things off my plate, putting new things back on my plate, and same goes for my team. That's kind of been the last 6 months, which has been quite a bit of work, but I feel like we're through the thick of it now. And so we're now transitioning, which has been really great. Just, share my personally, I now have way more capacity to work on all the product level items that I've been meaning to work on for the last several years. And so I'm day in, day out collaborating with engineers, and I was doing that, off the side of my desk primarily because I was having to deal with the board, fundraising, payroll, all of those things now I no longer need to deal with. I can now put all of that energy towards product development and a number of other things. And so, some of the big product initiatives that we're working on and the vision behind the acquisition from Docupace. If you think about Docupace, they do enterprise workflow automation for the largest advisory firms and or institutions. Hubly does workflow automation and management for your small, medium business segment of RIA firms. And so Hubly is what we call the operating system for an advisory firm's back office. Now, one of the key feature sets that Hubly has yet to develop, but is crucial to the automation and functioning of workflows, is your data gathering, forms, and client engagement tooling, which miraculously PreciseFP does. PreciseFP is a really strong tool at engaging with clients. For example, if you need to onboard a client, you need to collect data. If you need to do a review with client and understand if their financial situation has changed, and you need that data to sync into your financial planning software, sync into your CRM, you can build very structured engagements, or what is known as a URL-based form, to collect data and update information for your client. So it's an incredibly powerful data repository. Hubly has not yet developed the forms functionality, but integrating those two pieces together, essentially the power of forms and data with workflow automation, is going to build a more powerful and integrated back office operating system for advisory firms. And so that's our vision, is to large part integrate those, and then hopefully future tools as well, to provide a more comprehensive system that advisory firms can scale their business with. Instead of them having to connect all these disparate tools through Zapier or some other thing, they will all be under one hub and all fully integrated. And so we're starting to work on a lot of those types of initiatives now. And, more nerdy piece that I'll reference is that you'll see most softwares out there, if it's a CRM or workflow tool, have some sort of form feature, ability to gather data. And then that form feature can be used to trigger and automate workflows. And so we're just taking that very well-known concept that many other software tools have proven is important, and we're using and leveraging the tool called PreciseFP and Hubly to provide a better experience to the back office advisory firms.
That's fantastic. That's fit. I love it. I love it. So I know we're kicking from home here, but I do have a couple other areas I'd love to explore with you. David Knock is going to be joining me for an upcoming episode of the show as well. And then I think at some point, the three of us are going to get together and kind of talk a little more in depth about like all the awesomeness you're doing there. And you just painted a really great picture. So I think that's going to be a fantastic conversation. But one of the things that David said in our prep call, kind of together, the three of us were together in a prep call, as he said, his role is to support the leaders. And you've kind of already articulated, he's done a really great job of that, to ensure that you have the environment and the resources you need to kind of shine and do your thing. He doesn't want to meddle in day-to-day operations. And I'm sure that's some of the stuff you discovered when you were doing the research and listening to podcasts and watching his interviews and so forth. But as an entrepreneur who, you were talking about it, there was a period there where you kind of got out of entrepreneur phase and you got into kind of managing an integration process here. But now you feel like you're back into entrepreneurial zone. At least that's what I'm hearing here. But how does it change? Do you feel, I'm sure there's some sameness and some differences there. So how has it changed? Like being an entrepreneur, that is it a company that's owned by another company, I guess?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'll maybe more philosophically talk about how to approach entrepreneurship, or at least how I think about approaching it. And I think, do you make decisions for the long term or the short term? I think is pretty much the day-to-day challenge that any business owner has, right? And prior to the acquisition, there were moments where we were either almost running out of cash or, barely making it to bootstrapping and profitable and challenging and struggling with that. And obviously those things influence your decision-making process quite heavily. And I think post-acquisition, what's been quite refreshing for me is because we now have access to more resources, not unlimited. I wish I could even have more resources from David and the leadership team. Everything's, you got a little bit of give and take everywhere. But there are a number of longer term initiatives that we've been able to bring forward because we know we have more time. And so that's been really nice, is that we're investing in a lot more infrastructure and scalability, which we haven't had the capacity to do. And we're re-envisioning what parts of the legacy customer experience have been in Hubly. And we're taking now 6 years of understanding the user journey, how they use the product, to actually redesign parts of that experience completely from scratch. Because I've just had, many more hours to like sit there and think about, if I could go with everything I know today and I could go back 6 years, how would I design and build this differently? Which has been like such a fun question to ask. We obviously can't do it overnight, and there's, going to be staged implementations of it, but I feel like it's almost like I can redesign and rebuild Hubly from scratch in a way, which has been a really fun process to go through, and really exciting for both myself and the engineering team to have 6 years of data and then to bring that into redesigning our customer experience almost completely to an extent, and at least work backwards from a different vision. And so that's been the most fun part, I would say, and I think next time I build a company, which there will be a next time, I don't think anytime soon. Yeah. I need a little break from that, but I would like, as a first time entrepreneur, 24 years out of college, when I was 24 years old, out of college, I did not do as much long-term thinking as I probably should have. And so I'm now able to really do that better this time around.
I love the fact that that's one of your lessons and one of the things you're currently enjoying too, right? There is absolute benefit to both components, right? Like starting something with like, hey, there is no plan B. We got to go. We got to move fast. The whole, move stuff and break things, move fast and break things type of mentality, like that sometimes has to exist, right? When you're launching something. But there's also, on the flip side, value to not being super cash strapped and constrained, value to being able to take a long-term vision when you're on the right track, right? So, early in my career, I worked for Fidelity Investments. And, I think most people watching and listening to this show are aware Fidelity Investments is a private company, right? Like it's a massive company, but it is private, right? Prior to going to Fidelity, I worked at a public company. There are dramatically different mindsets for the executives at a public company that is managing to quarterly results than there are to working for a private company that can think like, hey, we're building something, we're building the right thing, we're going to take our time in getting there. So there's definitely some value there. And I'd imagine for you as an entrepreneur who, as you mentioned, typical entrepreneurial journey, right? Constantly worried about running out of money, going out of business, all that type of stuff. Get that fear of death. Having that off the table must feel great.
It feels awesome, right? Like I'm also a little crazy and probably psychopathic, where like I kind of like the fear of death as well, right? Yeah. Like, and the adrenaline that comes with that. But I think, even venture-backed technology companies, and Hubly was that, right? Like, you're also likely depending on the venture capitalists that back the company, they're generally working towards what needs to happen to hit XYZ metrics before the next round, right? And that could be 12 to 18 months down the road. And so it's not as bad as probably quarterly decision making that happens on, for public companies. But I would, especially if there's a new tech company who calls you and wants to sell you some software, I would likely recommend asking them, like, who's backing you financially? What sort of timeline do you currently have available still on your runway? And how are you approaching decision making for your roadmap development? I think it's really important to like ask your technology partners those questions. And there's even what I see now, more and more technology companies on the market. Like just take AI note takers, for example. I think there's probably 4,000 AI note takers on the market, if not more. But if you just look at the wealth management tech vertical, I think there's like 6 or 7 now. Like, it's insane. Not all of them can succeed. It's impossible. The market's not big enough. And so, like, who are going to be the winners, or who have the most financial backing to make really good long-term product roadmap decisions is likely something to consider even in your purchasing process for technology.
Guys, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's really important. There's, last year some new SEC rules came down, basically putting the advisor on the hook, right? The wealth management firm on the hook for due diligence of the technology providers that they're working with, right? For understanding their handling of data and all that type of stuff. And if you're dealing with something, and there's any type of personally identifiable information in the solution and all that type of stuff, like, you want to make sure that these companies are going to be around for a while, right? Because, they're reasonably bulletproof, right? Like this, this is an important business, right? One wrong move and you lose clients, and that just stinks, right? So making sure, I love that you're asking people, like, tell me about your funding. Tell me about who's backing you. Like, where are you in your process? And that can suck for a startup, right? Like,
if I had $1, like, I actually am like really proud of most of the advisors on the market. I actually got asked that question more than I probably expected I would be asked it when starting Hubly. And so I think there's some general good knowledge out there about it. And I think it depends on the technology that you're buying, right? Like, honestly, an AI note taker, it's pretty easy to replace, right? Let's say one goes out of the business, sign up for the next one, click a button, notes are being taken for the most part. Now, the thing with Hubly, right? Like, every single business that uses Hubly, their livelihood is fully dependent on our rating system, right? Like, trying to migrate away from Hubly is a 6-month to a 12-month-long project to move into, and there's no good competitive solution on the market for Hubly, right? Like, you're migrating back to Redtail or Wealthbox's, workflows, which are not good. Generally speaking, they're okay in some senses, but they need some work. And so that was also an important part of our decision-making process for Docupace's acquisition, is that I know these businesses can continue to rely on, even if Louis gets hit by a bus tomorrow, like, Hubly will continue to operate and serve their businesses and their livelihood, but we're also core infrastructure to their business.
That's fantastic. Well, let's hope you don't get hit by a bus. Or
yes, that would be nice.
One of the guys that you say, he's like, we had to change that phrase. I was one of this guy that I was talked to all the time. He's like, we should call it getting hit by an Uber. Nobody takes the bus anymore, right? It's maybe true, right? Anyway. All right, man. Well, this has been fantastic. So myhubly.com is the website, or people could probably find it through going to Docupace's website, but we'll send them to myhubly.com. You are also active on LinkedIn, so relatively easy to find there. Where else are you hanging out? Anything else you want to share with the world and let people know they should be paying attention to?
I'm always surprised by this, but please go to our YouTube channel. Like, how little people check out YouTube channels. Most technology vendors should, and if they don't, they definitely should have a comprehensive YouTube channel with videos, demos, customer calls, webinars. Like, we've really invested a lot of energy into our YouTube channel to make it easy for you to find out more about Hubly. Websites are good, but they're also going to be very 2D. And so I highly recommend everyone that I speak to just go to our YouTube channel, spend a hour or so there just watching some videos, and you'll learn a whole lot more about what we're about through that process than anything else. So
I tell you what, dude, if I could reach through this screen and give you a bro hug, you'd be getting one right now. We talked about the FinTech map earlier. So we have done research on all 550 plus companies that are on that FinTech map. And we went through and see how many have podcasts, how many have YouTube channels, how many are active YouTube channels. So we have all the analysis done, right? And we did it by all the different things. And it's really funny. We've reached out to all the companies, letting them know, like, you don't have a YouTube channel. This is really important. And then we did a deep dive analysis on, like, the adoption of podcasts and YouTube video consumption by professionals in America today, all that type of stuff. Like, everybody you're trying to reach and influence is listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos and, derivative clips that are being shared on LinkedIn and all those types of places. So I'm super happy you shared that. So bro hug coming your way, virtual one, whatever it takes. All right, buddy. Well, Louis, so fantastic having you on the show. Thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge props to my man, Louis Retief, for coming on the show and sharing kind of all that insight of what it's like to start a company as a young guy entering an industry you've really never worked in and growing that company over the years and then having it acquired by another company. It's really fascinating stuff. And then, of course, to see that he is still very much committed and not just kind of like, great, that was awesome to have my company acquired by another company. What's next? I love that he is diving in on continuing the mission. Awesome, awesome stuff. As I mentioned at the top of the show, please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast platform or YouTube. Leave us a comment. Give us a little like, by the way. Always helps get the word out about the show. That's all I have for you today. I hope you are having a great time. And be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. See ya. Bye.